Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the African Investor Podcast. Welcome to the African Investor Podcast, where we talk about all things business and all things African. The time has come for Africans to stand up and be counted. The future of our continent lies squarely in our hands. We need to start investing in African businesses, and we need to do it now. Here at the African Investor Podcast, we show you how. Hello and welcome. This is Steve Odhiambo. Thank you so much for listening in to today's episode. Really appreciate you guys. On today's episode, I'll be interviewing Alex Litu from Kenya. Alex is an informal economy analyst with tons of experience researching on the so-called shadow economy. At the end, please make sure to catch more information about the African Investor Masterclass, which is a series of business training seminars specifically targeted at diaspora Africans. So if you live in Germany, you do not want to miss this. Stay tuned.
Thank you, Steve. I'm Alex Litu, an informal economy analyst based in Nairobi. I have been working in the informal economy environment for the past 5 years, 5 to say 7 years. While working in the rural markets of Kenya, I got to interact with a lot of informal businesses while I was selling international alcohol brands in these markets. So it's through these interactions with the informal traders that I got an interest in the informal economy. It's been a really neglected yet very vibrant part of the Kenyan economy. So I currently work as a consultant on the informal economy, sales and marketing, and carry out research and develop marketing strategies.
Just as Alex has said right there, I think his experience and expertise in the informal economy is going to be our focus on this episode. I think I'd really want to dive in on the informal economy just to help most of our listeners understand what exactly can be classified as an informal economy or the informal sector, and what kind of businesses, what kind of business activities revolve around this sector. So to start off the Q&A session, Alex, you've told us a bit about your experience in this sector. So help us understand what's the formal description of the informal economy or the informal sector of any industry.
The informal economy is these are businesses, enterprises. I'd call them small businesses, micro and small enterprises that operate within any business environment. Though the reason that they are classified as informal is that they usually don't pay taxes to the governments in which they operate. And they also have problems operating with licenses. So you'll find that this is due to their low levels of input and capital into their businesses. Most informal businesses are located within in the Kenyan example especially, you'll find the informal economy is vibrant around slum areas and areas where there's a lot of poverty. But the informal economy has been growing to the extent that they are competing with a lot of formal business.
This is some fairly interesting information. What would be the impact of the informal economy on employment and job creation, especially in sub-Saharan Africa or Kenya in particular?
Steve, thank you for that question. For just for our listeners, sub-Saharan Africa, most people don't understand the term or don't get a feel of what countries fall under sub-Saharan Africa. These are the countries that are originally to the south of the Sahara Desert, and exclude countries that are to the north of Africa, countries like Morocco, Egypt, Algeria, who are part of the League of Arab States. So any country falling from between Nigeria all the way down to South Africa, excluding Sudan, which is also a member of the League of Arab States, are classified as sub-Saharan African countries. If I look at the impact of the informal economy on employment and job creation, the Kenya Economic Survey 2017, which was released last week, indicates that the informal economy in Kenya accounts for 89.7% of the total employment demographic. This would be a good thing, but it's not. The reason I say it's not a good thing is that most of the jobs that are in the informal economy are low quality jobs. So you'll find people working in conditions that are dangerous to their health. They don't operate with protective gear. They operate in areas where there's inadequate access to water. And the fact that, as I go back to the statistic of them being forming 89.7% of the employment demographic,
which is huge.
Which is huge. The formal employment will obviously be 10% of that demographic. And part of the reason that they've grown that much could be attributed to the high poverty levels. There's also a decrease in the number of formal employment opportunities.
Yeah.
So you find that these rising unemployment crisis in formal sectors, in the formal sectors, is what is also fueling the growth of the informal sector. And this also in the Kenyan scenario, this to me indicates a resilience in the Kenyan populace.
Which is good, right?
Which is a good thing, which is a very good thing. Kenyans are people who are very determined to get through any situation that's thrown at them. If I could take you back to the example of M-Pesa, which is now a global leader and example of how poor people can be used as they actually are the drivers behind the massive growth of M-Pesa. If you remember,
that was actually the target group, right?
Yeah, that was the target group by the mother company, the telecom giant, which is Safaricom. Their competitors were focusing on the high-end clients. So it got to a point where they hit a ceiling in terms of growth. But what Safaricom did is that they targeted the lower income Kenyans who really picked up well, and they went further and developed products that suit their needs. That's how M-Pesa was born and has exponentially grown. So to me, that's a good example a very good example of the potential that the informal economy has that's still not been exploited.
I totally agree. I totally agree with you on that. I recently
Yeah.
read a report where they said the actual number of transactions that were actually carried out on M-Pesa in a year were
Yeah.
larger than the Kenyan budget.
Yes, they are. I was also reading Safaricom through M-Pesa makes profits of 5 million in an hour, 5 million Kenya shillings in an hour,
In an hour.
which is in 1 hour, which is huge, which is very huge. And if you look at Safaricom, there's a report I was reading. They are on the Nairobi Stock Exchange. They are worth more than the next 9 companies combined.
On the NSC.
So on the NSC, that just tells you how much potential there is in the masses, if I could call them that.
I totally agree. The bottom of the pyramid markets are untapped. That is a lot of underserved market there, and people like Safaricom, or rather the mobile banking phenomenon, is just showing us exactly how much of an economy that can be built out of that. My next question would be, Alex, you've told us a bit about the formal economy. You've described it to us. You've described the landscape in sub-Saharan Africa. We've talked a bit about M-Pesa, which most people around the world would be familiar with. What are the challenges that these entrepreneurs face in the informal sector or the informal economy? Because you've described there being these businesses, going through a certain number of challenges to actually get to market. So what would be the main challenges that they face?
I could actually give you a couple of challenges, but I'll just dwell on the key challenges that I could think of. The first one being access to finance. This is a huge problem for these businesses. You find that most of them usually have problems accessing loans to expand their business operations. The reason is that they're seen as high-risk clients by financial institutions. What this means is that when they're going to apply for loans from a financial institution, be it a bank or a microfinance institution, the financial institutions are not quick to advance loans to them. Part of the reason, which is a major problem in the informal economy, is that most of these businesses don't keep financial records. So when it comes to trying to calculate their risk, how risky they are as a client, it becomes almost impossible to do that. So most of them end up being turned away. And the people, the businessmen who engage in the informal economy are predominantly poor, especially for the micro businesses. So that's one of the big challenges. Another challenge is lack of capacity, or should I call it low capacity in terms of tech. They don't have updated technical skills to operate modern equipment. And like I alluded to earlier, their financial skills are wanting. So that's a problem of capacity. The third challenge I could that I'd mention is most of them operate in poor working conditions. You'll find that they operate in areas with inadequate sanitary facilities, be it toilets. Access to water is a problem in most of the areas in which they operate, security problems, hazardous physical environments, and most of them, like those who operate in the metal and woodwork sectors, which are huge in Kenya, do not have protective gear like the boots to protect your feet from falling equipment or metal, the goggles to protect. They usually use your usual shades, which are not standardized equipment when welding, for example.
They're not really equipment that should be used for such jobs, right?
For such jobs, so that most of them end up developing a lot of health issues, health problems. If you think of the Juakali people, who are the metal Juakali for our listeners is metal artisans, who the conditions in which they work in are loud. Most of them don't have sound mufflers for their ears, so they end up developing health issues. The last challenge that I could think of is poor access to social security. This is when you're thinking of retirement benefits or just basic health insurance. Most of them do not have those sort of arrangements within their employment scenarios. So this is a setback because they have to dig into their pockets to settle health bills. And most of them end up missing work, hence forgo income for the days that they have not worked. So that becomes a huge challenge for them.
It's more of a casual labor kind of arrangement where they would get paid. If they don't own the small business, then they would get paid depending on the number of days or the numbers of hours that they come in, right?
Yeah, and for those small businesses, if they don't, if they are not there, they won't get money for the day, so that's lost revenue for them.
Okay.
And and I just thought of another one, which is another challenge, which is huge in terms of it being a setback to their operations. Most of the goods they produce aren't standardized. This means that the institution, the government institution, Kenya Bureau of Standards, has to give you a mark of standardization if you're going to sell your goods in higher end markets like supermarkets, more formal settings.
In any industry, right?
Yeah, which is it's universal. So the fact that their goods are not standardized, they can't access supermarkets, they can't sell their wares in areas where they could get more income. So that's a huge challenge, standardization. Yeah, those are the major challenges that I could think of.
Okay, thank you for that, Alex. You judging by the four main challenges that you just pointed out, I think I can pick out that these business owners or these businesses are operating at low capacity, because I would assume that they have markets, they serve real and existing markets, but due to the challenges that you just mentioned, that they're not able to, perform at maximum output. And, these are problems of efficiency and productivity. So you have, they would be carrying out their business in the least effective way possible, if I can put it in one sentence. So I
Definitely,
think
definitely.
I'd like to zero in on that, because by pointing out these challenges, this is exactly where other entrepreneurs or other investors could come in and exactly try and solve these challenges for
Yeah,
these entrepreneurs in the informal sector. So I think that's really an important thing to keep in mind.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much, yeah, that's pretty much it.
I agree with you. I agree with you. Now, on that same breadth, right?
Yeah.
How do you think we should go about solving these problems? And I'd like to start with you talked about skills. You talked about the lack of relevant technologies, and I think these 2 points are pretty much related. I think you also mentioned that in the same point. So
Yeah,
you'd have things like bookkeeping systems or accounting systems, or
yeah,
stock taking, stock keeping, financial
yeah,
literacy, financial knowledge,
yes,
things of that nature. So
yes,
starting
definitely.
by that, like how do you think we should go about solving these problems? Like how could they use technology to make their operations more efficient?
Um, when you're looking at the lack of the various skill sets that they do not have, the lack of various skill sets that they do not possess, um, the solution to this would be just carrying out training, capacity building, which is training aimed at alleviating or improving be it the technical skills or the financial skills. Like in technical skills, that would involve teaching them how to use modern equipment, be it
Yeah.
power tools, uh, and just teach them how to operate modern machinery. That would be one of the ways of, because most of them usually use hand tools that are very slow, which means that they'll end up producing less products. So by giving them technical skills on how to operate modern equipment, that would really improve their level of operation. Like you were mentioning, the financial literacy is a very, very crucial key part of it.
Yeah.
Just this would involve, like you alluded to, basic bookkeeping training, accounting, stock stock taking, and stock, just having records of their stocks, and the most important would be organizing their day to day, recording their day to day operations. And most of them, which is an educational problem, as most of those who are involved in the micro businesses, especially, have a basic level, have just attained a basic level of education. So
Okay.
that would be around basic accounting practices, and these would now enable them. They'll be in a better position when they're approaching microfinance institutions or banks for loans. Um, and another solution would be providing, like I was saying, grants and loans that are uh, coupled with grants at affordable rates. You see, looking at the Kenyan situation, the government last year introduced an interest rate cap whereby banks could only issue loans at 12%. They were capped to 12%.
12% was the cap, huh?
Yeah, 12% was the cap. Before, they used to issue loans at up to even 22%. And this is how they used to make their money and buffer that risk for them. But by being limited to 12%.
That's also ridiculously expensive, eh?
Yeah, it is ridiculously expensive. But that's how they used to buffer that risk. That's how they used to make their money. But since that interest rate cap was introduced, there's been a shrinking in the issuance of loans, especially for the small businesses. They're the ones that have suffered the most. You see, the larger firms have not been really affected by that cap because they used to get the loans at those rates anyway. So it's the small businesses that have really been affected. So a solution would be getting loans at an affordable rate. And another solution to these challenges would be to encourage standardization so as to enable them to access wider formal markets such as supermarkets and hypermarkets, the more formal market areas. This would be done could be done by training them on the importance of standardization, and also most of these issues revolve around access to finance, because with the money they'd be able to pay. It's a money question. Another solution will be upgrading of their workstations so that they'll be able to operate in saner environments. And these would also attract more clients once they have better structures in place. They'd be able to attract more clients. Lastly, encouraging them to work through associations and SACCOs or cooperatives. SACCOs are savings and credit cooperative organizations. So these will give them a unity of purpose whereby they'd have a larger pool of finances. And when they're dealing with any bits, governments or financial institutions, they'd be a strong voice as opposed to operating individually. So this unity of purpose would be a big solution.
I'd like to take you back to the point that you mentioned about the standardization. I think that's also extremely important because standardization is directly linked to quality. I mean, if these goods could be, conform to industry standards, that dramatically increases their quality, that makes them more competitive in the marketplace, not only in Kenya, but also across borders in neighboring countries in East Africa and so on.
And you see that's exactly the problem there. That makes them limited to their areas of operation, areas within which they operate, which this in turn steals or cancels out the export market, for example. That's totally out of the question for them. So if they had the standardization in place, they'd access the international market. And from my during the time I've worked and visited most of these businesses, especially the artisans, those involved in artwork, for example, the metalwork guys, the woodwork guys, they make really good furniture and products.
They make beautiful stuff.
Beautiful stuff. And that's, for example, that's why you find tourists coming to the country and just being amazed, and they love
They
those
love that stuff,
products.
and they're fairly unique. They have some great designs, and if you've been
Exactly.
following these people for uh, a number of years, you'd notice how they would gradually improve on their craft. Like if you saw these guys making beds 10 years ago, and if you go to the same area, you find the same artisans 10 years later, but the quality of their beds has drastically improved.
That brings me back to that issue of innovativeness. They change with the times and always have a solution for. They're always, I think, 10 steps ahead, because it's more of like a do or die situation for them.
It's survival, right?
Survival for the fittest. That's what it is.
We've talked about these challenges. We've talked about a few suggestions or possible solutions to these problems. I'd like to bring in the aspect of the diaspora and Africans living in the diaspora actually getting to invest back in Africa. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I've been of the opinion that Africans living outside of Africa have always been, first of all, these Africans are stakeholders by birth.
Yeah.
These Africans are people who have their families back home, they have their loved ones back home, and most of the times they would be in these countries outside of Africa purely for purposes related to work. And their long-term goals are actually to relocate and maybe spend their sunset years back home. So the reason I say this is because that people living, or rather Africans living in the diaspora, have been sending quite a large amount of large amounts of money when you talk about the remittances that are actually sent from people in the diaspora back home. I mean, this is in the billions. From the last report done by the World Bank in 2015, I think they said $32.5 billion is the actual amount. That's the figure they put on it, that was sent back to Africa in form of remittances. Now, this is only the formal money transfer, not including the informal. The people who use all these other funny routes to send.
Hawala.
So the idea behind this, and why I'm bringing this in, is that Africans outside of Africa send money for one purpose or the other. At times it would be for health, it would be for insurance, it would be for sustenance, and most of the times it's because of trying to sustain, to form a livelihood for their family members back home. And you find that in these cases it's directly involved in a business in one form or the other. Whether it is sending money to your mom so that she could buy stuff from the market and maybe sell them at the store, or whether it is sending a bit of money to your brother or your sister back home so you can start that law firm or that business. It's in a scale of 0 to 100. It's a continuum that differs from really small amounts to very large amounts. And we at the African Investor podcast, we're convinced that Africans can channel these resources to actually grow the continent, to create much more employment and help grow the informal economy. So my question to you, Alex, how do you think that these Africans living outside of Africa could channel their funds and actually invest in this informal economy? Like, what would be, the first 2 or 3 steps? How do you think we'd go about it?
That's a pretty good question, and very interesting, because as like you are saying, the World Bank says that the remittance is at $32 billion. That's a huge amount. That's quite substantial. So just thinking of how the Africans in the diaspora can invest in the informal economy. The biggest way I'd see that happening is by them forming investment communities whereby they come together and pool their resources where they are,
Okay.
and through which the following scenarios can happen. They could be some sort of bank, or whatever you'd like to call that investment. Yes, a vehicle by coming together, like we were talking about unity of purpose earlier. By coming together, they'd one provide financial solutions to the informal businesses. By making these businesses profitable, they'd be directly benefiting. These you see, by forming these investment portals, apart from providing grants and loans, they could think of being the linkage between the informal market, the African market, and the European or American or wherever they are in the diaspora market. So these investment communities could be marketing
That is brilliant.
agencies.
I like that. That is brilliant.
That way they'd be the link between the continent and the diaspora, which is a huge opportunity. And that could only happen, the best way that could happen is through them, because they have a better understanding of the countries in which they reside.
That is brilliant.
And for this to happen in a seamless manner, it would be wise for them to, first of all, also set up offices in the countries in which they see strongest potential. Like, for example, have a representative on the ground. Local presence is key. But the fact that they are there, 90% of the informal business cracking that market, the solution lies with them.
I agree with you.
Do you see what I'm saying? So they don't have to see themselves as people who will be giving money. There'll be an access to that market, and that they could benefit immensely.
Of course, yes, of course, because starting by standardization all the way to increasing efficiency, productivity, introducing machines, more output, then this could seriously put these markets and these industries in the league of actually exporting their products to markets even overseas.
Yeah.
Because like if you look at what the Chinese are doing,
Yes.
they really focused
Yes,
and
example.
capitalized on their industries, and the standardization was also key for them. So they can literally export anywhere.
And which is a very good example. The perception that the Chinese had on their because
Correct.
that was their informal economy. Those are cottage industries. And that's the same way we should look at the informal economy. Instead of criminalizing it or just looking at it as very tiny businesses, we should see them from the point of the potential that they hold. Because these are our cottage industries. These are our innovations. So by investing in them, we'd be going the China way. We'd be going the China way, and that would make us a giant on our own terms. That just I always like going back to the Safaricom M-Pesa scenario, how they did not because that was their strength in my view. Yeah, they put their money on it and ran with it. So, and they're currently eating the fruits of that investment. They are benefiting,
and rightfully
big time.
so. Speaking of that, how
Yeah.
would we no, let's take it one step further. I mean, this is someone sitting in Europe or America or Australia, and they're thinking, okay, well, great, I have some money put aside, I would like to invest in any form of an informal business, just sort of support the sector and ensure that it grows. How would I identify credible business to invest in? Like, what would be
Yes.
the key criteria to look for?
You see, this is where the local presence would be important, because for that to happen, there are two major things that they'd have to do. They'd have to look at businesses that have been in
At least a year.
operation for at least 1 year. That's at least a year. That will prove that the business has the stay power, has the longevity to operate, and can absorb shocks in the market. That would be very key. The duration of operation. Another thing they have to look at is the business records. As much as most of the businesses don't keep records, there are some that have some sort of record keeping, as scanty as it may be. But that is so crucial. It's so crucial. The business has to have some sort of records for scrutiny of so that the investor, who's our person seated in London or in, say,
Yes.
where would Cologne, for example, can have a way of scrutinizing the business operations and see how they can gradually invest their investment, invest their money. Those are the two key. The others would come along as you'd have to be on the ground, to establish how skillful they are. But you see, like those are the secondary issues I'd be thinking about, because for people, for an informal business to be successful in its terms, you'll find that most of these artisans are usually very skilled. They're usually very skilled, but the problem is what comes about when you're talking about or thinking about operation of modern machinery, that becomes a problem. So establishing the skill set is also key. And we'll expand on those issues as we continue our discussions.
Good stuff. So we've taken a look at how diaspora Africans can actually invest. You know, they need to come together, maybe form these investment groups. They need a local presence in the countries of interest. You know, we're thinking East Africa, you'd probably be looking at Kenya. If you're talking West Africa, you probably want to be in Lagos, Dakar. If you're thinking Central Africa, Cameroon is pretty big at the moment. If you're thinking Southern Africa, you'd want to be in Cape Town. You'd also maybe want to be in Zambia and so on, just depending on the countries of interest and the businesses that are involved here. And you've also talked about how we identify these businesses. talked about the skill set. We talked about bookkeeping, which is key. I mean, if a business has been around for at least a year, then we should be able to look at the numbers, because any credible investor would say, I mean, numbers don't lie. So if you can take a look at a company's books over the last 12 months, then it gives you a realistic picture as of how far they've come, where they started, and where they're going. So you can make your projections and a sound investment decision. So thank you for that, Alex. I think those are important points to take home. Moving on, I was thinking, how involved should I expect to be in any particular business? And by involved, I mean you invest in a chicken rearing business. I'm going to go very informal. You invest in a chicken rearing business, and you keep getting calls every 2 days or every week. This went wrong and that went wrong, and we need you to decide on this and that and the other. So that's exactly what I mean by level of involvement, because I think depending on how much research and training and preparation goes into the planning of setting up the business, then the investor or the people involved, would be able to free up much of their time, knowing that the business is in good hands. It's being run by capable managers, if you may.
In my view, it would be very of a high importance to get a weekly briefing on the progress of the business. This would enable them to track the growth and know the challenges that the business is facing, so that they can mitigate them early on before they become too big and cause maybe the business to collapse. So the weekly briefing is very important, in that it would give the investor an opportunity to see where the gaps are and know how to mitigate them early on. This is important in terms of it will also make the informal business operator, entrepreneur, very alert and keep him motivated, knowing that at the end of the week there's something I need to give back, some positive feedback. So that will jog their excitement and their involvement in the business as well, to make them work harder and give closer attention to details that they may ignore, not knowing how important they are. So just the weekly briefing from the informal business, however they'd like to do that. Be it if they are far, the phone call would be very, very key. But what is even more important is to have local representation. Be it here, I'm thinking of the investment community having a chapter maybe in Kenya, whereby they have an officer or two, or that will be up to them, who will go around making physical visits, occasional physical visits to the businesses. So this will also give the interaction a more personalized
is really key,
touch. It will and that it's really, really key, really key. Those are the two things in terms of involvement: just having local representation, and that would enhance the weekly briefing. Once these people see someone coming to visit them, they'd be serious knowing that there's someone on the ground.
Yeah, great stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
I must say, Alex, it's been great talking to you about these subjects, and you've definitely helped us understand the informal sector a little bit more.
I'd just like the listeners to have a very open mind and look at the opportunity that the informal economy presents, especially for our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. This is a way of positively making a real change in the countries that you come from. And there are many ways that you can tap into them if you get organized and form these investment clubs or communities that will give you a bigger, more power in how you interact with the businesses back home. This is because the informal economy, from the analysis I've done so far, it presents an unexploited opportunity that is ripe for investment. You can get my work on litualex.wordpress.com. Litualex is litualex.wordpress.com. I do weekly blog posts just touching on matters informal economy.
Thank you again,
Thank you.
Alex.
Thank you.
It's truly been an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you so much for listening to episode 1. Stay tuned for the next episode 4 weeks from now. At this point, I'd like to say a little about the African Investor Masterclass. I've put together a series of seminars where I basically share everything I know about doing business and investing in Africa. Having raised over 200,000 euros in funding and basically gone from idea to execution more than 2 times back to back, I had to overcome enormous challenges. From getting turned down by investors after several pitches all over Europe to failed product launches, running out of cash, and almost getting evicted. So I made it my life's mission to empower the next generation of African investors, basically so that they could in turn invest in the next generation of African entrepreneurs. The next African Investor Masterclass will be held in Frankfurt on the 17th of June from 2 to 6 p.m. Tickets are going for 69 euros, but if you hurry, you could get an early bird ticket for as little as 49 euros. That's a good 20 euros for being early. You save 30%. I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you. Bye.